Dear participants, please take your seats. Our forum will be broadcasted online, and we will start with the speech of the Prime Minister. We will start soon. Our forum today will start with a speech of Prime Minister. We are going to broadcast online. Please take your seats. Soon we shall start. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we would like to welcome you at All-Ukrainian Forum Ukraine 30. These days we're going to talk about economy, and today we will discuss national economic strategy and industry as the foundation of our economy. The series of 30 weekly forums dedicated to the anniversary of Ukraine's independence is a big dialogue with the participation of the government, civil society, international partners, and Ukrainian experts. Ukraine is open to its searching for those solutions, and these forums can give us answers to very important, challenging questions, which are the pillars of our independence. Forum Ukraine 30. We would like to welcome all who are present at Ukraine 30 Forum, everyone who's watching us online. This is Ukraine 30 platform, which is not only about touching upon important and controversial issues that are relevant to many citizens of our country, but also respond to them by discussions, statements, panels and press conferences. Prime Minister of Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Denis Shmyhal. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Ukrainians, international partners. Today is 3 months since the National Economic Strategy 2030 has been adopted. It was designed starting from September 2020 in collaboration with different international partners and stakeholders. The strategy is about 20 vectors with specific initiatives and indicators which would allow us to sustain the economic growth and enhance the standard of living and well-being for the Ukrainians. In these 3 months, we have demonstrated our progress in economic restoration of Ukraine. The foundation of economic policy for the government is macroeconomic stability. For the successful implementation of all reforms, we need to build a country with sustainable public finance systems, developed financial sector, and the government has made a significant step forward in this regard. We have approved the budget declaration for the 3 years ahead, 2022-2024 budget declaration. It's a very diligent work. It's a big piece of document which has been drafted for the first time, and for our business this is a key event because that ensures the predictability and of the government, which is one of the components, ingredients of the successful doing business in Ukraine. The partnership between the government and business in our country is the foundation for the sustainable growth of economy. We're talking about joint projects, also concessions for the roads and works, joint extraction of deposits, and smart regulation, smart coordination between government and business. The rule of law has a direct link to economy and investment climate. As regards to the fact that we're talking about the reform of the law enforcement and judiciary, we have established the Bureau for Economic Security. 1159/9 is the decree which is a new page for business and public development. So this is about equal treatment for everyone, and that will enhance the attractiveness in terms of investments, because that builds the attractiveness given that there is equal and a level playing field. Also, the improvement of work of tax administration. We see progress in combating different shadow schemes and avoidance, so creating creating equal rules for the business. Digitalization for these agencies also allows to simplify and ease in the work of honest business and eliminate all possibilities for corruption. Another item for improvement of collaboration with business is the new regulatory environment. For SMEs of Ukraine, the requirement to comply with all requirements is a big challenge. Parallel to dozens of new improvements in the regulation, the government is launching a new instrument that would allow us to open sole entrepreneur status without participation of the registrar just in a couple of seconds. That's a big step forward which reduces corruption and also will become the foundation of automation for all relationship processes between business and the government. Reducing the role of the government in the ownership of utility companies is another area, and here we want to have only strategic or socially important and relevant big companies to be under government control, who will have to perform their functions with good quality. Other ones will have to be privatized, and the 45-43 law, because of the voting in the parliament, eliminated the last barrier for privatization of large state-owned enterprises. In the view of the big privatization, as we call it, and the first facilities are already prepared to go. And this unblocking is a big signal which says that Ukraine is ready to cooperate with investors, is ready for investments, that we are ensuring transparent sales of the big enterprises in Ukraine. In the international policy and trade, we've made significant steps for the industrial visa-free regime with EU. The preliminary evaluation mission of EU have prepared the report regarding the readiness of the infrastructure in Ukraine for ACA agreement. There have been 7 months of intensive work prior to this and negotiations regarding the industrial visa-free regime, and this is the billions of dollars in potential earnings for our companies on the European markets. In terms of investment attractiveness, we've made an important step introducing tax incentives for investment projects. According to 1294/9 law, the so-called draft law on investments with high investments, or investment nanny law, until 31st of January 2035, they will be exempt from import excise tax for equipment for big investment projects. This initiative is also is part of our national strategy under industry until 2030, and these tax incentives will stimulate the upgrading of the main equipment and resources, and stimulate the domestic production. So to implement the decree of the law, decree of the president, the government created the enterprise which will be in charge of implementing large investment projects, promote international cooperation, and enhancing competitiveness of Ukraine. That would allow to attract new investors and will help us implement the long expected projects. This instrument exists in many other countries of the world, and Ukraine now will become part of this cohort and will get this new instrument to cooperate in the financial market and investment sphere. Digitalization is another one, and that is a cross-cutting theme in the 2030 strategy, because the digital state not only enhances the productivity of economy, but also influences the quality of life of the people. And the changes which are happening there are happening in all areas, and I think you can feel this launch of the platform in environment and forestry use, and many other platforms, up to the new services and the documents that are available through the DIA app, which we expect to be more than 200 by the autumn 2021, which will be paperless government. as we have promised before. In the agricultural sector, economic strategy envisages additional support programs for agrarians, for agricultural producers, and agricultural producers have received that support already, and that state aid would also be used for insurance of agricultural crops, insurance for the emergency situations and anthropogenic disasters. And so for the groups of farmers that are using irrigation, that will also apply. And this is part of our big project on developing the irrigation systems in Ukraine that would allow us to increase crops and yields in the southern regions by twofold or even more. The implementation of the public and private partnership program is one of the key tasks for the Ministry of Agricultural Policy, newly established agricultural policy for 2021. We've presented the pilot project for fair transformation of the coal mining regions. This project was also part of economic strategy, and the Cabinet of Ministers already created the coordination center for the transformation of the coal mining regions. We started cooperation with the Secretariat of the Energy Community. We're creating a multi-donor fund for transformation of the coal mining regions. And in 2021, we are planning to start this transformation of the coal mining region with the support of the European partners. And one of the main areas of economic policy of our government is the concept paper of the so-called long money. Last year, with the initiative of the President, we have launched the privileged credits for SMEs, and in this 1 year since we see the results, so we have issued 50+ billion privileged credits. Next one is creating the stock market and full-fledged stock market and second pillar of the pension system. Last year, the government, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, American Chamber of Commerce, and USAID signed the memorandum regarding establishing the national mechanism for stock trading on the capital markets and commodity markets. That's an important step for establishing a stock market in Ukraine, in other words, for developing such infrastructure and creating civilized environment for the commodity markets in Ukraine. Our citizens will get new opportunities in terms of financial instruments for savings and investments, and the business is getting a long-term and cheaper resource for implementing and developing their own enterprises. And the government, of course, will benefit in terms of economic growth. The National Economic Strategy, together with other strategic documents, the plan for implementation of the presidential initiatives, the list of priority draft laws, and the budget declaration for 2022-24 will become the foundation of the government actions that are going to be submitted to the Parliament for approval. We are improving the action plan and implementation program. We are using the approach which has proven to be successful in other governments, in Canada, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, World Bank, UN, and International Monetary Fund. This is the so-called RBM project, result-based management, so it will be also digitalized, and that's what we're preparing. And with this link to the budget, we want each of these initiatives to be resource-based and justified. And with the link to specific indicators, we will see the results in real time. So the national strategy is already demonstrating its result. It's been only 3 months, but we have hundreds, I would like to remind you, of economic solutions that would double GDP and improve the well-being of Ukrainians. Thank you to the team. Thank you to everyone who was part of creating this document and everyone who is contributing to implementing this strategy of the daily basis. I wish you all today your fruitful work in your forum and the discussion of the results and maybe some new innovations for the national strategy. Thank you very much. All the best to you. Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. In a couple of minutes, here on the main stage, as part of the Ukraine 30 Forum, we will go into more detail in terms of the Ukraine Economic Strategy 2030. And apart from officials, we will have also the representatives of big organizations and associations which are international partners to Ukraine. Ukraine's economy is like a music, and the government is trying to take the highest tone. Things that have never played before will play in orchestrated manner according to the rules. Some things that were redundant will become fashionable and profitable. And the economy is like music. It is subject to the rules, and there cannot be any external influence to it. Ukraine 30, economy without oligarchs. Ukraine's economy is getting back after COVID-19. According to the government, the increase of industry is growing by 30%.
Від коронакризи хімічна промисловість. Є успіхи і у машинобудування. За останні 4 місяці виробництво зросло на 6,5%. Нарощують темпи підприємства державного концерну «Укроборонпром». За підрахунками Мінекономіки, у січні-квітні падіння економіки сповільнилося на 0,2%. Стратегічними в Україні є 17 галузей промисловості. Зокрема, це оборонна, паливно-енергетична, транспортна, авіаційна, ракетно-космічна, машинобудівна, металургійна, хімічна, деревообробна і поліграфічна. А ще будівництво, сфера телекомунікацій і зв'язку, агропромисловий комплекс. Мінстратегпром має забезпечити розвиток технологічного виробництва у цих секторах, а також розробити державну програму реформування всіх стратегічних галузей промисловості, розраховану на 11 років. Це Всеукраїнський форум Україна 30.
This is Ukraine 30 Forum, and we are starting the first panel, the first session on National Economic Strategy 2030. And I would like to pass on the floor to the moderator of this discussion, the General Director of the Advanter, CEO of the Advanter Group, Andriy Ligach. Thank you. So, economy without oligarchs. This is the topic of this panel discussion, and we wanted to talk about whether the national economic strategy can accommodate the global modernization and whether de-oligarchization is possible per se. And we would like to discuss this with the first Deputy Vice Prime Minister, Alexei Lyubchenko. We would like to welcome you here on your position and here in our panel. Kirill Krivolab, the advisor to the Prime Minister and the CEO of the Center for Economic Revitalization. And Ms. Derevyanko, Anna Derevyanko, the CEO of the European Business Association, and Andriy Gunder, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce to Ukraine. So Andriy will be connected online today. So the establishment of the national economic strategy, which was taking place starting from 2020, has gone through lots of discussions in economic modeling that has done by the Center of Economic Revitalization with the involvement of business and business associations, and this is why we decided to build today's panel as a meeting between the government and business associations. But at first, I would like to ask Alexei to highlight some of the priorities of the economic strategy and how they can fit into the de-oligarchization agenda. Thank you. Ukraine is a unique country, and just going through all of our advantages will take lots of time. But there's one shortcoming that I would like to highlight. We have a habit of underestimating ourselves, our capacity. We don't believe in our strength. We do have the potential to ensure the high level of economic growth, and this is not just a dream. Why this is not a dream, I would like to say, is that when there is a vision, but this vision only stays on paper, that is a dream. But when there is a vision and then you top it up with actions and steps, then you implement this dream and it becomes reality. We have a highly diversified manufacturing. We have all types of activities in our economy. We don't even imagine fully how, with this diversified system, how difficult it is to pick and choose the drivers of growth. The president has given an impetus for a very dynamic change, and in this strategy 2030 that we're going to discuss, we already started implementing the steps. As Prime Minister said, we already have, for the first time, the 3-year forecast of economic and social growth, 3-year budget declaration, and the key, and I think the core item there, is that government demonstrate very vividly that it's going to reduce the expenditure of government expenditures in GDP as share of GDP. By the 1st of July, the action plan will be submitted to the Parliament, and this is basically the main steps that are envisaged by the strategy. So I'm saying that the dynamic is very speedy, because I'm trying to catch up myself, and I'm being conscious of this, and I am confessing that we need to catch up with things that are already going on in the country and what the government is doing today. But I can assure you that everything will work out well. The Ministry of Economy right now is working on the new model for economic growth, and we are identifying these so-called the items of economic growth. We don't have many economic resources. With the resources that we have to identify the points of where we can touch and get speedy results for the low-hanging fruits. We have the governance system that allows equal conditions for economic entities, competitiveness development incentives, focusing on the mechanisms of the policy rather than specific objectives and tasks. And we have the economic model, which is commodity-based and consumer-based. Well, there's nothing bad in that as well, but what we want to achieve instead is that after 5 stages or 5 phases, we want to get to the new governance system. The first stage is we want to identify the sectoral objectives, then analyze the barriers and impediments towards their achievement, and then forming the KPIs and instruments to be clear who is responsible for what in this country, and the Ministry of Economy here is going to manage this change and coordinating the process, setting the goals for central government agencies, and then after that the almost last phase is the putting together the budget. So what the economic model is going to look like. So it's going to be a managed economy to create more added value in the country, and speedy transformation of manufacturing, creating and building the bridge for the economic independence. And we have identified several clusters based on this by different selection criteria. So the technological manufacturing cluster, economic security and decarbonization cluster, life safety, the city of artisans or masters, and then the last one is the transport. And we have made a detailed analysis of the ranking based on this analysis and how they impact each other. Then we came back to the intersectoral balances to understand where these growth pillars are, and in order to tap on the existing resources in an efficient manner. Just at the end, I would like to give you an example which is quite acute in a way. I understand we don't have enough time to do everything we planned, because we have to have the also we're spending more than 50 billion hryvnia on education, what we have instead, and now we're going to have a fair of skilled people, because we don't have qualified experts. Maybe we don't know of them or we don't have them, but we have to increase and improve this selection process for the qualified labor force, because spending 40 billion every year, we can't find 100 worthwhile experts. So does it mean that in Kazakhstan they have smarter people who have been traveling all over the world with scholarships from the president, who have very good experts, very good skilled managers who come back very patriotic? They come to Kazakhstan, they created hubs with English law. There's nothing difficult there. We just simply have to just do it. And I will do my best to make sure that what we're going to discuss today and the strategy 2030 would become a good systemic document. But the most important for us is not just a piece of paper. We have lots of papers in Ukraine, and we continue drafting them. The most important is action, specific action, doing and achieving results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexei. If the key to this action is education and innovation, well, we are talking about the growth of the human capital, then indeed the national economic strategy can be implemented, because its innovative nature is the foundation of all that, underlies that. Kirill, to addressing you, can you please tell us, is there any continuation regarding the national economic strategy? And speaking about the government and the Center for the Economic Recovery, what's their attitude towards the implementation and the planning and, let's say, the generation of new strategies, maybe regarding the economic growth or national economic strategy? Okay, I'm going to tell you all the details, how we are going to build to ensure this implementation, and what's the role of this the center. And please, I would like to ask you to put my presentation on the screen. So this forum dedicated to the 30th anniversary of Ukraine independence. So let's sum up and speak about the economy today. Ukraine refers to the developing countries with an average income level. We are not Liberia nor another Liberia, Somalia, but we are, as compared to our neighboring countries, we have the five-fold poorer, let's say, GDP, and that means that our natural resources, our geographic situation and location is very advantageous. For our poverty, there are some reasons, because the economy almost all the time over the last 30 years with some of the intervals. It was the place of speaking speculation for the politicians and, let's say, and getting some free or cheap money. As a result, the other countries, they actually were creating their own strategies. They took care of reforms. They liberalized the market. They actually established capital markets, stimulated export, and they actually built the added value chains. Not only we failed to create timely the necessary conditions and context, but we actually did a very bad work of the available situation, like the free economic zones or national industrial parks. Even though we're talking about the land reform and land market, we actually doubted the need for the foreign investors. You know, this is kind of simplified issue today. The different conditions. We try to nivell or let's say nullify everything if we're talking about the period starting from 1990s, etc., etc. And it resulted, as they say, Euro 2020 is now on this screen. We have to change the situation. This GDP is not enough for good education, good, let's say, medicine. The only way out is to increase at least twice the budget for those things in the coming decade. And we have a clear vision how to do that. Actually, this strategy was drawn up in September last year, and over the last 6 months we had different MPs, and everybody actually managed to reach a certain consensus. This kind of superficial document, this is level 1.2 or 2.0. We have to work through different details and different models of the market, but it still exists, it's available now. It fixes the very clear course of our country towards the European and Euro-Atlantic integration, the supremacy of law, the intolerance to corruption, very integral and honest competition, and the care of the talented and gifted people. And if you're talking about the ideological, let's say, joining the European course, we have to double the GDP level, and nominal GDP in 10 years must be over 450 billion euros, and export must be not 60 but over 150 billion euros. All the indicators which we've never seen in this country, plus several billion investments, let's say several dozen billion investments which we have never seen before. This will lead to the, let's say, the threefold increase of the income of the population, in the improvement of medicine, education, etc. So what's the logic behind this strategy? You could see at the background when Prime Minister was talking here. First of all, we have to take care of the formation of the basis, macroeconomic stability and sustainability. Second module is the creation of the capital markets. What they mentioned about the reform and creating the stock market and its filling with money and funds from the pension reform, pension system, those are the ways leading to that. Then investments, first of all, domestic investments, this is the competition for the markets of capital. And the third module, sectoral module, we are talking about the development of the large-scale industry branches, the processing industry, let's say, that is growing into the agribusiness, etc. And development of those areas or growth areas will allow us to get the finance and the models for the education, medicine, the army, and in the end of the day, our task is development of the entrepreneurship, because our SMEs must become the medium-sized companies. They have to export. They have to become the world leaders, and this is the only way for development of the entrepreneurship. So how this strategy is going to impact or affect everyone? What we have on our menu, they're going to get the developed capital markets, the supremacy of law, and taxes whenever it's economically reasonable and justifiable. Development of the PPP and the concessions, open auctions in the urban town planning, etc. We were talking about different foundations and funds which are in place. Industry will have the compensation of 30% for the year, covering the expenses and different project, the industrial parks, which the industry has to invest into the construction of roads and the creating such industrial parks and the infrastructure development, link connection to the electric power grids, and financial support from the export credit agency, which was established this year. And actually, they are very important, and they did a lot for the implementation strategy of grants. They are going to have the land market for irrigation, for development, growth, the stimulus for the producing different agricultural products. Also, we are talking about different steps towards the development and investment, input, etc. The companies are going to have the privileges within certain network. We are going to coordinate that with the European EU, GPR, also development of IT and education and startup system. This strategy contains the development, let's say the system of development is kind of sophisticated program for development of digital systems. Again, we are talking about the map of the tourism. We are going to get the support, and we are going to increase the grants in the energy sector. It's going to get integration with the EU market. Let's say they're going to have the competitive basis for the stimulus for the modernization of the power grid. We're talking about simulated motors. It applies to coal, different kinds of fuel and energy. The transport will have the necessary tariff formation system, the free markets for the rolling stock, etc. in the seaports, which are still public, using target use of the different charges and duties paid. They are going to reform regulate the custom duties and the regulation decentralization of the permissive system. SME is going to get this everything electronic and digital state, paperless actually economy, and they're going to facilitate the access to the finances and the education, and also the grant for the support of export and reasonable regulation. This is just a small portion what we have on our menu. We are talking about hundreds upon hundreds of initiatives which actually are related to the national economic strategy. How are we going to implement the latter? We are not talking about some separate plan for the implementation of this or that plan. We are talking about the budgetary declaration, which is closely related to the government, the government system. Whatever mentioned, this must be in the full-fledged IT tool. Part of that is going to be public. One will be just kind of the restricted access, but it has to create a certain architecture of the different spheres of the policies and the national priorities. Everything is going to be monitored by the expert community and definitely by the doers per se, or executors per se. This exhausts my presentation. This is a very important step. This is just the beginning of the road, and we have to switch over to the implementation of the national economic strategic task. Well, what are let's say the next steps? We are talking about the program of the government, which is going to implement to a great measure the national strategic economic strategy. This will allow us to monitor the implementation of strategy. But what, in your opinion, what we still lack, what has to be taken care of in the near future, to be introduced as soon as possible? You know, the national economic strategy mostly is focused on economic stimuli and, generally speaking, on the economy per se. But this creates the resources for development of education, for the let's say the sphere of security and safety, medicine, and but in all those spheres they require economic models and economic way out of the situation. Both in medicine and education, we have to raise the salaries, we have to reach the level of our competitors, income-wise, if you're talking about the incomes for the population. As Alexei mentioned, the development of human capital and education is the prerequisite of the successful implementation of the strategy. Actually, this is the ultimate goal of this strategy. Well, seemingly everything is so good, and the business was involved for the implementation of this strategy, and I do appreciate the efforts of EBA for your initiative and support. But the government is talking about the near, let's say, the short-term plan in order for us to have an opportunity to take care of the business plan as soon as possible. But is this sufficient to return investors to Ukraine so that Ukrainian companies stop to give the outreach and train outreach efforts, giving the other countries the opportunity. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me to join you in this very interesting discussion. It's very difficult to argue that this document is absolutely holistic and well-grounded and justified. And Kirill, together with the members of this working group, did a very good job. We have to follow what still we do not have at this point of time. The plan of these specific actions related to the issue of implementing this strategy, what Alexei mentioned and Mr. Kirillov continued, it was very interesting for me to listen to that, because at the beginning it was not clear how the strategy is going to make progress, how we're going to follow that into 20 or 30 years from now. We are going to reach the goals which are mentioned in this very wonderful document. In our opinion, one of the top priorities is ensuring the necessary justice in this country, because this is going to underline all the rest of the things which we need in this country. A good work of the law enforcement bodies, just and fair courts, etc., which will return the confidence and trust to our country. And without that, the investors will have a very careful, let's say, carefully entertain different or consider different proposals. And in fact, we really might have very good documents, but indeed not enough investments. We are talking about the instruments or tools mentioned by Kirill. The one who is going to have the helm in his hand, so to say, will become the citizen. Well, actually, citizen is what you mean, because he has to vote for this or another, let's say, faction or people. But we have a situation where the government, the parliament, and the president must be involved to the implementation, specific and translated into practice of those documents. Another very important for business unit is, well, we can place different emphasis in this, but what is important today for business is the decrease in the load on the fund for the payment, labor payment fund, and then after that we can actually think about some other instruments and tools. But in order to make the business transparent, we have to make necessary conditions, create necessary conditions for transparent businesses. But the public at large, the activists, and all the way to the deputies of the ministers of economy, they're working on this issue. Excellent. That means that we are going to have the necessary results. We really would like to see the results in this context, so we are going to attentively watch and follow all this. Next block, which is important to us, is digitalization. And we already see on this road rather serious victories, and we just have to continue to follow this road, because on the one hand, the citizens and communities will have an opportunity to monitor, to follow different services and provide their feedback to further, let's say, improve the services provided by the state. Another very important thing, and we actually submitted our proposals, and we thank you really that they heeded to that. We are talking about ecology, environmental topics, and circular economy, in our point of view, must become the kind of the backbone, let's say, or the cornerstone, which will lie in the foundation transformation of the economy. So we have to stick to the green course, let's say, undertaken by Europe, and not only Europe. We have to become the clean state, to inhale clean air, to drink clean water, pure water. So, but we have to take care of the large-scale transformations inside the domestic economy. Well, I'm glad to say, in the vectors of economic development, they have the list of the red lines which should not be crossed. And here I would like to mention that even today, we already start to touch and sometimes even cross those lines in order to achieve the goals of 2030. We still have to follow the selected road and continue the structural reforms, not to create overloaded, let's say, regulation. And also we have to work not too cumbersome, let's say, not to overload the business with the extreme or let's say extra taxation. And we have to think about the physical natural person's income tax. Well, even now we can stop to doing something in order to achieve the goals of 2030. Well, we were talking with the students of the Taras Shevchenko University regarding the price formation, and they're preparing what they have to prepare to, let's say, to avoid inefficiency or intervention of the state into this business or this issue. Again, we are talking about the red lines in strategy. It means that the state has to create the equal rules of the game regarding certain efficient regulations. But in fact, business itself must control the market. Let's say, control the price formation, the priorities of development. Can you say on this specific subject matter? Well, actual business can actually control everything or guide everything and establish different priorities, but must be a very good arbiter or referee on the part of the state and the institutions, governmental institutions, which have to ensure the supervision over the rules of the game. Otherwise, there will be a lot of violations, and there will be a kind of self-goals scored, And like we watched yesterday during the European Soccer Championship, when there was the self-goal in one of the games. Yeah, in order to ensure the institutional force or strength for the state to be the strong player to defend the equal rules of the game, I would like to echo the words what said Alexei. Could be different strategies, and we were working on those, but without proper actions, we are just going to have another document, another paper. And another thing which is important here is consistency. It's very important for us to be consistent in following the course which we undertook, because presidents come and go, governments come and go, and we have to transfer or to hand over, if you will, some kind of sacred things. I'm talking about the attainments, achievements, the programmatic things which we achieved, in order to not to reinvent something or to run in the opposite direction. But we have to develop what we already achieved. Thank you very much. A week has elapsed since the EBRD and the SEC signed the memorandum, the agreement, which in fact provides an opportunity to create Ukrainian stock market, not only stock market, the commodity market. Andrea addressing Mr. Gunder, Prime Minister was talking about the industrial, let's say, visa-free regime, and he was talking about the growth areas and points, but etc., etc. But we are talking about some kind of open world, global market, as Anna mentioned. The state has to help or provide some assistance. One of the priorities maybe is the support given to the Ukrainian export. What can you say on that? Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much. I'm on the self-isolation regime, but spiritual, I'm with you. I'm really happy that business has been involved to this very important discussion topic, economic strategy, and what is business looking for, seeking for. And I mentioned that all the last studies demonstrate that. Number one, what is needed by business is the supremacy of law. When we have this supremacy of law, there will be the confidence and trust of the country, and the investments will come here. We closely communicate with our colleagues and the in the Chamber of Commerce in Washington, D.C., which actually took a very in-depth research where there is very link between the supremacy of law and the flourishing of the state. And if those states actually stick to the necessary guidance and the governance, all the companies, international companies which come to this in our country, they create high-quality jobs and actively develop the existing communities. That's why, first of all, this is the most important thing, because any strategy must be based on the supremacy of law. Number two, what investors are looking for. Investors actively follow what is mentioned by the international institutions. In our case, we are talking about IMF. And we are not talking just about the money or cooperation with IMF. It's a sign of approval for the potential investors and demonstrates to international institutions that Ukraine is a reliable economic partner. IMF is not only financing, but also the availability of the internal and external investors. And we follow very closely the development of the let's say the circumstances negotiations with IMF. Among the 42 European countries we have ECC's branches, the biggest is in Ukraine. And we pay attention to in all over Europe. We have 17,000 companies which invest in European countries, different countries, and they look at this issue, the issue of trust. It's going to be a kind of a bridge between the company and the government. We have to build the trust to demonstrate that you can safely invest into Ukraine. How to do that? We have to demonstrate the specific examples of those companies which over the last 30 years went to trust this country, who created a lot of jobs, who can share the successful stories with others. I believe those are the best ambassadors for Ukraine. I'm talking about those companies who started to believe in Ukraine, who created necessary jobs, and people trust them. They hit to them in the United States, all over Europe, all over the world. That's why, in our turn, our task is to demonstrate these success stories, and their number must be much bigger. The issue of trust and the issue to remove some of the hindrances. The business is prepared. What we signed with the BRD and USAID and about stock market with the government of Ukraine, we are talking about the private sector, which is absolutely important, and those investments are very important. Why? Critically important, because without the direct foreign investments, Ukraine will remain a toy in the hands of oligarchs.
And I think these international companies need to be attracted, stimulated, incentivized, and welcomed to Ukraine, and then we will see the tangible results of the growth of the economy. But this is a strategic goal of attracting 15 billion FDIs per year. This is like 10 times, this is just much more, tens or 3 times more at least. So is this realistic? Is there that interest, that appetite on part of the international investors, and the problem is the lack of trust? Maybe there are no ideas, no territories, no projects ready. Well, there is capital out there. The companies are sitting on their capital, and they're ready to consider projects. They're ready to consider the markets. But the question is that they have clear criteria. So they invest where there is rule of law. And I think this is the time to do this, because the markets are quite favorable. The liquidity on the markets is very positive, and I think the companies are ready to, especially in this COVID world where everything is changing, there is a chance to use this opportunity for Ukraine and start this breakthrough. It will start step by step. So there are some specific companies that are doing this, so let's launch them, let's start the projects. And I think that based on these specific companies, these ambassadors, we will make sure that they will be spreading the message to others. The companies themselves will show their success stories to others. Thank you, Andrei. I have a question to all of you. So, on the one hand, this is not an economic question. This is not a question to the Ministry of Economy, like judicial reform or restoring the system of fair treatment. But in business companies, we do encounter this pressure from the prosecutors, from tax authorities, from other government agencies. What do you do with this? So will this be resolved by establishing the Bureau of Financial Safety or Security, or is the solution to establish special zones with English law like we heard today about Kazakhstan? So what is the way out of the situation that Andrei mentioned? Well, I can start, if you allow me. I already said some time ago that Ukraine is a self-sufficient country. It has enough of the investment resources because I hoped we have a census soon to see whether the 40, 46 or 32 million, but still there's lots of us. We do consume a lot, and this is our main added value. And the role of personality in the history has always been very important. And our main problem is that for 100 years the entrepreneurship has been raped, entrepreneurial approaches have been eliminated, the proprietary rights have been abandoned. And the reform of the corporate governance as an instrument for investors to understand who they are dealing with is important. We don't have enough people who can act. So therefore the first step is to simply take hands off those people who can act, who can do something, and then they will do much more than the government can even imagine. And I know the numbers. We haven't used more than $7 billion for environmental and social projects as of the 1st of May. $7 billion in the country where everyone says that there's no investment. So this money is just sitting there. Please go ahead and use it. But there are no projects, there aren't drivers. So we are lacking people who know how to do things and do them. And I think, and act. So, and I have experienced this when I worked in the state tax service, and I think, and I can confirm that nothing has really changed. The 20% of VAT is still at 20%. So nothing has been changed in terms of administering these tax. But in 5 months of this year, the payers are paying 1.5 times more of the value tax than before. So what has changed? And I know what has changed. The change of attitude. So there's 20% for everyone. So there are other, like, things that the deficiencies, but they managed to break the spine of all these deficiencies, and we have the increase of 1.5% of this tax that has always been corrupt, and that's a major increase. So the main thing is people. This is human capital, and this is why I started by saying that we have an efficient use of budget money for this public obligation in terms of education, where we require certain types of quotas for universities. But we have to act now, because today we're laying the foundation for this success. Thank you. Thank you. Kirill, in terms of, according to your models of your center, the biggest impact on the growth of economy is Ukraine's membership and being part of international integration processes, export development. So it seems like Export-Import Agency has been launched. There's more funding for this agency. Is this enough, or what else can the government do to enhance the growth of Ukrainian export? Export support is a miraculous cause, because potentially Ukraine is very export-oriented because of the number of the people who can manufacture things, because of the natural resources and transit corridors and our vicinity to big markets. But we're falling behind so much. We haven't done simple things like you wake up, you have to brush your teeth. And even simple things like that have not been done economically. So the development of entrepreneurship after this desert that Alexei said after 100 years that it has been destroyed, it's not rocket science, really. There's a clear way of how to help entrepreneurs, starting from promoting this entrepreneurship culture in the high school, in the university, up to business support centers, consultations in the regions, and then training in different ways of opportunities for this export, how to package, how to do the design, so different types of logistics, and then comes the money. So the knowledge, the skills, and understanding where the money goes. On the government level, there has to be an understanding what are target markets, which added value chains we have to incorporate into. This has been an exercise several years ago. There was the first approach, very generic. There haven't been many of the answers, but there was the first exercise. Now it's time to do the new export strategy, and we have to understand our markets very well. So supporting the culture, nurturing entrepreneurship, developing all the support infrastructure, starting from support offices to export agency, privileged crediting for insurance, and also understanding on the level of the country where are we going, which agreements have to be reviewed, which things have to be amended, because association agreement was signed politically, but economic, we just took everything which was given to us. And I think this year is the possibility to review some of the items in the and only with Europe, I understand. Not only with Europe, yes, that pertains not only to Europe, but that mechanism of support which exists now, the decision was made that this has to be done through our economic offices and representations, economic departments in the embassies. But we have to understand how we select, how we train, how we set objectives, because one model is we finance outsourced companies, and the government expanded the functionality of the Export Support Office. It is now on the level of the Cabinet of Ministers. It has a bigger mandate, so it's basically the entrepreneurship/export development project. So we need to focus all the donors' efforts on this office to make it like the end of the spear that would disturb this mundane absence of support. Yes, we will follow this. So, Andrea, I have another, maybe a bit of a controversial question. The government supported and implemented the idea which allows us to have special conditions which are called the investment nanny. But at the same time, there are ideas which are being implemented, ideas like European approach, where the entrepreneur who invests in the fixed assets is getting certain compensation or tax breaks for a longer period of time. So from your point of view, what else can the government do from the point of view of taxes, access to the financial market for foreign experts? Well, still, once you have the rule of law, I think that will be the foundation that we can build on. Second is cooperation with International Monetary Fund and a clear, transparent and tax policy. I think that's very important. But most important is to keep to your commitments. If the government a few years ago said that to the renewable companies, come to Ukraine, you're welcome, and as they came in, and then the rules of the game were changed in the process, I think that is a point which undermines the trust. So I think we need to stick to the word, and you have to really take care of these companies that believed in Ukraine and came, and they will be the best ambassadors. It's important to keep up like that, because it's much harder to bring the new investor than keeping the existing ones in. And I think that this is the trust based on the rule of law, with the transparent policy of IMF, with transparent tax policy, with investments into infrastructure, health, and all the sectors. And I think that is the dialogue that for which we're very grateful to the government. So it's important for us to participate in these negotiations and to hear the business, because the business doesn't want preferences, they want fair treatment. And I do believe, and I'm optimistic about this, that the success will come soon. Well, we always analyze how the government is coping with the crisis, and just to confirm is that the government is surviving when they don't change the rules to their clients, where sometimes they work go into minus, but support and sustain the trust. And I think an important statement here is, and Anna, I would like to, I think you do support this. Can you tell me what is the role of this process is played by de-oligarchization? Is Ukrainian economy possible without oligarchs? Will it survive given the high level of oligarchs now? It's a comprehensive question. It's not an easy one. But we're going back to the question: who is the arbiter in this case, or who can decide who is playing according to the rules and who's not? And I think that oligarchs do have more opportunities because they have accumulated certain capital, but also there's a lot of also commitments. So this has to be a golden middle, which would allow also the business to develop, because they are replenishing the budget, and not to impede other ones, for everyone to have the same treatment and equal rules. And so depending on how the government will act and what kind of actions will come from the government, that's how the business will respond, because we can do all sorts of say all sorts of things, that we're going to combat oligarchs and then not do it at all, or do something else, and all of these slogans will then remain only on paper. So the trust is most important. The trust can be the big business and the state, the small business and the state, between the business, and that's how it should be. But it's based on the real actions. Without that, we can't do anything else. And going back to, it's not a comment, it's a question regarding what one can do in order to move forward and progress. I think that on the one hand, there is a cluster of people who can act, and they don't need to, and they're simply moving forward, and they are not waiting for anything from the state. So it's important not to impede them, let them just move on. and everything will be fine. On the other hand, the government also has to demonstrate things that we have been talking about today. And maybe there should be investment in the infrastructure, innovations. Yes, indeed. And I just came from Odessa recently. I thought that nothing is happening in our country. You know, there are things that are happening. The roads are being built. There are new roads. They are nice ones. There are even free beaches in Odessa that are being created, and which is a surprise, and they have good quality. So we are moving forward, but I think that we need to move faster. That's the only thing. By the way, one of the business club of Odessa, they are creating their own business strategy based on the national strategy. The process has moved on. So thank you to the panelists. We discussed today that strategy means actions, that part of the economic growth is the trust that the government should establish. And one of those points of trust is the capability of the government to implement the red lines that are in the strategy, and also the growth plan, which will become also the action plan for the government. So I'd like to welcome all our panelists, Alexei Yubchenko, First Vice Prime Minister, Kirill Krolab, the advisor to the Prime Minister, and Anna Dervanko, the CEO of the European Business Association, and Andrei Gunder, the President of the American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much. Thank you for the discussion, and we also invite you to talk to the media representatives. We discuss the questions of industry as the basis of the national economy of Ukraine.
Після пандемії COVID-19. За даними уряду, зростання промисловості у квітні прискорилося на 13%. Найшвидше оговтується від коронакризи хімічна промисловість. Є успіхи і у машинобудування. За останні 4 місяці виробництво зросло на 6,5%. Нарощують темпи підприємства державного концерну «Укроборонпром». За підрахунками Мінекономіки, у січні-квітні падіння економіки сповільнилося на 0,2%. Стратегічними в Україні є 17 галузей промисловості. Зокрема, це оборонна, паливно-енергетична, транспортна, авіаційна, ракетно-космічна, машинобудівна, металургійна, хімічна, деревообробна і поліграфічна. А ще будівництво, сфера телекомунікацій і зв'язку, агропромисловий комплекс. Мінстратегпром має забезпечити розвиток технологічного виробництва у цих секторах, а також розробити державну програму реформування всіх стратегічних галузей промисловості, розраховану на 11 років.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, in a couple of minutes we are starting our forum. Please come back to your seats in the session hall.
This
is Ukraine 30 Forum, and now we're going into a very important discussion. Industry as the foundation for the national economy of Ukraine. The speakers are already on the stage. I'm pleased to pass on the floor to the moderator, the head of the Parliamentary Committee on Economic Development, Matrona Taluha. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you to the viewers, to the audience and panelists. I'm very glad to welcome you all at the discussion dedicated to the development of the Ukrainian industry. And even more so, I'm glad because this discussion was initiated on the highest level, because some time ago it was something unthinkable. 3 years ago in Davos, in the Ukrainian House, we had a discussion which was called the Ukrainian agrarian super state, but with all respect, I don't remember any success stories where the countries would become successful only because of the agrarian sector, maybe Mesopotamia the only exception. So without the contemporary industry we cannot count on any substantial economic growth or steep economic growth. And in that regard I would like to say that just like we are making the focus on IT outsourcing for Ukraine. I would like Ukraine to also become the industrial outsourcing for Europe. And the question of modernization, question of re-industrialization and outsourcing is something I'm going to discuss with the people who are experts in this field. I would like to welcome our guests, Alexander Zavitnevich, the head of the Committee of the Parliament on National Security, Defense and Intelligence, Yuri Gusiev, General Director of State Enterprise Ukроборонпром, Alexei Milovanov, the President of the Kyiv School of Economy, the advisor to the Office of the President, and the head of the Board of the Ukроборонпром, Volodymyr Vlasyuk, the head of the Committee on Modernization of the State Industrial Chamber, and Mauro Longobardo, the CEO of the part ArcelorMittal from Kryvyi Rih. The first question I would like to ask to Mr. Zavitnevich. We have some good news. 1.5% is the trend of restoration of the Ukrainian industry, but with this pace, we will need at least 4 years, take into account the previous crisis that may take even longer, to come back to what we have lost and to compensate for the decline. So the COVID crisis demonstrated how important it is to have the smooth and sustainable development. So if we take the question of security of industry as element of the economic security, and economic security as part of the national security, you as a head of the parliamentary committee, what do you think is needed to achieve the economic security and safety of the country? Thank you for everyone who is here and who is watching us. It's a complicated question at the same time, but in terms of solution can be even easy if we work as a team and work together for this goal. So 2014 or COVID right now shows some weaknesses in different sectors, agriculture as well, by the way. So things that need to be done in the first place by the government is to set the priorities right. So what we can really do in the short period, short term, mid-term, and then 5 and 10 years in future. 2014 demonstrated that our industry and our military industry was very much focused with the big share on the country that we call the occupying state right now, and that invader state, and that model means that it faded out, and we had to be looking for other markets earlier, look for other technologies before, and look for people. People are key, people who are capable of doing things. And yes, we do hear some voices that some super successful companies, they were under Soviet times and now with these 30 years, but these are exceptions. I think they have been very lucky, and they were lucky because maybe they had a good minister or a good director who really was investing heart and his life in those companies. But these are exceptions. But now we have not one or two of those companies, so we need to change the rules, change the framework, and provide new instruments which are mentioned in our law 3222, the specifics of the privatization of Ukроборонпром. So we have already some sad experience and notorious experience. So we have to learn our lessons, and for the short term, middle term, and long term, we have to sort out what we're doing. What kind of sectors are we engaging? Of course, industry has a big multiplier. It's highly technological. It engages many other companies that, compared to agriculture, the companies that are producing something else from the raw materials of the industry and from the industrial projects. So I think industry and defense sector as well. So thank you, Alexander. Here I would like to pick up on some of the words that you mentioned and ask Yuri, who knows very well and he has heard in practice from defense sector and how this could be the driver for the economy. Yuri, I have this dual feeling. On Thursday, I was on the Lviv tank plant. So there are orders and then the work is going on, but most of these contracts are refurbishing of the old vehicles, old machinery. So we have a big problem with upgrading, modernization. Many of these elements depend on the spare parts back from the Soviet times, and we lack them in our warehouses. And Ukroboronprom has just started producing for the artillery equipment. So we need to think about how do we achieve the safe supply chain for the defense industry and maybe for industry in general, because Henry say those who are chopping wood on their own will warm themselves twice as much as they would have just by watching this.
Well, I'm going to put a question to you, Dmitry. Have you seen the Zor product? This is something we take special pride in. This is what our defense industry managed to do over the 30 years of its independence. I'm going to give you some of the actual information, factual information. We actually established for the first time ever the serial production of the, let's say, of the Tawin based on the Shotsky plant. For the first time ever, we have the closed-loop production of the light armored equipment. This armored vehicle actually ranks among the 4 best world products. So we're talking about the creation of the assault, fighting, and bombing aviation based on the MiG-729 and Su-25. We also created AN-70, one of the best cargo planes in Ukraine. Actually, last year we signed the historical contract for the construction of Ukrainian EN-30 aircraft, and we're working in order to put in place or to sign additional contracts on the different enterprises of Ukrainian defense industry. We actually designed anti-ship Neptune complex, which has been one of the new weapons in the armed force of Ukraine. We started the production of high-precision artillery weapons, Kvitnik and its modification Barvinak, with the improved combat features and characteristics. Ukraine is the 7th country in the world which can manufacture such weapons. We also started serial production of Terka-Stugna Korsar combat. We designed and created a medium-weight tank, which is a new novel equipment in the armed forces of Ukraine. We are going to present this tank the other day at the security conference. We also face a lot of tasks set for us by the President of Ukraine for this defense industry. Those tasks include provisional corporatization starting from the concerns and all the way to the enterprises of the armed and defense sector. We are going to develop the armaments which will allow our country to let's say, to raise the flag in Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea. We have to introduce NATO standards and efficient modern standards for corporate management at our enterprises. Ukraine has to come back to to rank among the top 10, let's say, countries in the world. We have to ensure transparent and understandable for our partners' transport vehicles. Our defense complex must become the driving force for development of not only the industry but also the economy as a whole. It's worthwhile to know that the Internet was invented by the DARPA agency, the Agency for Defense Technologies of the Ministry of Defense of the United States. And today we have the huge window of opportunities to ensure the transport technologies, to ensure the corporate management system for the creation of high-precision products, machinery products, with the huge added value for the armed forces of Ukraine. Also, I would like to emphasize once again that we have to, first of all, to ensure, to provide the armed forces of Ukraine with high-quality armaments and weapons, also to promote the Ukrainian high-tech export to the external markets. We have to further develop the PPP. We created very powerful private defense complex. Our task is to ensure investments to come here into modernization, creation of industrial parks in the sphere of the industrial the defense industry complex. We have a number of problems as a result of the Russian aggression. We lost control over 21 enterprises of our sector, which are located on the temporarily occupied territories of the Crimea and Ukraine on Donbass. Through the underfunding over the years of our independence, they have the debts tuning to more than 14 billion hryvnia. We have to work on this issue. We have to restructure debts to ensure the soundness, financial soundness of the enterprises, and involve and attract our foreign partners in order to create the competitive technology and equipment. We were talking about R&D efforts. We spent more than 2/3 of our pure income. In other companies, in other countries, they use for that purpose only 1%. And answering your question, actually, we lost the connection between the science and the enterprise and the market. And I actually have to apologize and leave you early because we have to visit the Antonov enterprise, where they're working on the research and production cluster in order to use the Polytechnic Institute named after Sikorsky, which is going to teach the new experts in creating the high-tech aircraft the world over. Speaking about what we used to lose, I'm talking about the link between the science industry and the market. Today, the average age of the designers and engineers is 65 years. In our sector, we have the challenges we have to take care of, which we face today in the eastern parts of Ukraine, where for the 8 last years, Ukraine has to defend its independence and territorial integrity. The future wars are going to be waged from the offices using the unmanned aerial vehicles, UAV, and let's say the drones, if you will. We have to produce those using our plants and factories, enterprise of the defense sector of Ukraine. Suffice to say that over the last few months, following the order of the President of Ukraine, we did a lot. We created very important for the defense sector and development of our industry draft law 28/22. Involving on different enterprises of our sector, we have to ensure corporatization, provision of introduction of corporate governance, and providing the system of creating new institutions and implementing the task set for us by the top echelons of our states. We already have the growth of the production by 21% over the few last months. we signed more contracts than twofold and 2 times more, and we are talking about the high-tech products produced here, which will appear in certain markets. Suffice to say that over the last year, the income of the Ukrainian defense industry increased by 22 times as compared to the year 2019, and those are just the first steps we are taking, reforming the Ukrainian defense industry, creating a new system of the state defense industry complex. Speaking about the above-mentioned draft law, and we expect that this is going to be considered by the Verkhovna Rada within the next few weeks, which become the impetus for the rapid development of our complex, defense complex, which will create the terms and conditions for our cooperation with the foreign partners and create the chains of production, different products to ensure the infrastructure in order to achieve the goals and the objectives set for us by the Council of Defense and Security of Ukraine, the Supreme Commander and the President of Ukraine. We have to make use of the best technologies. We have plans to set up the joint ventures and joint projects with our partners. Recently, we signed the agreement with our Canadian partners on the development of the cartridge factory, which is badly required by our armed forces in the sector of defense. And those opportunities will be increased several-fold after adoption of the above-mentioned draft law. I hope that next time we gather here together in order to talk about successful implementation of that draft law, about this adoption of that law, and the opportunities which is offered by the development of the state defense industrial complex, and which is going to be instrumental for the rapid development of our industry and the economy of our state. We have very clear slogan in our team, that together we make Ukraine stronger, and it's high time for the parliament and the government to pull the efforts and do everything possible jointly in order to develop the defense sector and the adjoining sectors. So thank you very much for your support. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes, and I do appreciate your very informative presentation and speech. We had an opportunity to eyewitness the development of the industrial policy and see the people who are directly involved in those efforts. We cannot actually be on the road of innovation. So, Yuri, if you need to go, please do that. Thank you very much. I wish you success in your discussion of this very important problem. Thank you. Absolutely wonderful and informative speech, which shows how the role of the state in the economic recovery, and this is supported by the great theoreticians of contemporaneity, as in Roderick, one of the leading classic of the scientific ideas, in his article about normalization of the policy, he mentioned that for the economic development it's not enough to have a good state of the night watchman. It means that the position of state must be proactive. It cannot be brought down only for the just watching as an outsider what's going on in the economic process. So the question is not whether we should involve the state aid or the state in resolving the economic issues. The question is how to make it efficiently, and how important it is to provide the necessary number of necessary tools in order to do that. We have the agenda in our parliament. We are talking about creating the industrial parks and creating responsibility in setting up the efficient agency. We're talking about the long-term policy, which is called by Roderick, structural transformations in the economy. So my next question is addressed to the person who, for sure, Roderick maybe used his ideas teaching your students, and you know better than maybe anyone else in this country what we are talking about. But Timofey Milovanov, who is the president of the Kyiv School of Economics, advisor to the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, includes the issues of the defense industry. So my question to you: can the state stop to be a night watchman, let's say, and how the state can take the position and entertain the policy which will bring us closer to structural changes? Thank you. Speaking about the industry, it's very difficult to talk about that. Sincerely, the majority of the people have their own personal stances and positions, which is determined by the experience, the life experience of those people. The people who work in the industry, they say that the industry is the foundation of the economy and the society. Without the industry, there cannot be any future. The people who do not work in the industry, they say that industry today its share is smaller share in the GDP, and the services in the Ukraine even start to develop faster, and the economy doesn't consist only of industry. Then those people start to argue, and their attitude towards each other, kind of intolerance, and they say, I know about that the industry is important, but they do not know what to do with their services. Those who provide these services, they take care of some startup and they say the industry outdated. It's already dead. Do not bring back the Soviet Union here. And everybody believes that they face their own problems. Under such circumstances, it's difficult to think how we can develop the economy when everybody believes to be right and they do not respect the ideas and the position of other people. But if we come back more seriously to industry, we can look at our plants and factories which are successful exporters today. Owing to their efforts, we obtain the macroeconomic stability because they sell the commodities and services as well. And this brings us the hard currency, which today, in the absence of IMF, allows us to ensure the stability of hryvnia, because the export is stable and the prices for the export are rather high. But let's visit one of the plants, for example, in steel-making industry or machine-building industry, any of the enterprises. If we go there with open eyes, then we start to experience some respect and love, even if this is an old enterprise. But when you ask the question about the future of this specific enterprise, you can start to understand that they require billions upon billions of investments. Moreover, you start to understand that out of 10 or 14,000 employees, 14 would lose their job if the factory or the enterprise is going to be modernized. So we have to let's say, inject billions upon billions of investments and understand that they will remain with the 4,000 or something like that jobs. What we are going to do with the people who we are going to sack, to fire. And now look to the right side. We discussed the left side, but now let's talk about the guided tour of students coming to this plant or in enterprise. In the management of that plant, they take special pride in telling them that only 3 people were killed this year at this plant. And last year there were 15 people who died. But the students coming back after this guided tour, they would like to to get some job, which would be absolutely different from what they saw in this factory. They do not want to work there. They say, we understand we have to learn not to work at this enterprise. So whatever policy we entertain, if you do not find a mechanism to keep the talented persons in the industry, neither modernization, no investments, no attractive markets will help us. Mr. Gussi was mentioned that we have a huge gap between the people who are designers today and the youth who wishes or doesn't want to go there. And the average age of designers or the scholars who work for the development of industry is something between 60 and 65 years of age. This is a great challenge. That's why, in the short-term perspective, I agree we need to have an industrial policy in place. We can debate for hours, maybe for days or weeks. What does it mean? Today, I visited the unit city. Vasyl Khmelnytsky is the manager of that, and he demonstrated what they are doing in the unit city. He's a person who supports the industrial policy, supports the development of industry, but what he does himself, he departs from all this. He takes care of innovations, small startups. He has an IT school, the School of Entrepreneurship, business school. He doesn't build in the unit city industry or industrialists. He is creating the people who are taking care of the people who are going to create small, very fast and flexible companies. He tries to attract the talents to such companies. We mentioned how in the industrial cities like Kryvyi Rih we have to take care of the new education schools, which will take care of the IT or the entrepreneurship subject. And this is going to be done by Vasyl Khmelnytsky, who actually supports the need for industrial policy in Ukraine.
So if we open up our eyes and if we're going to be serious about this, the biggest challenge for the industry is that talented people don't want to go there. Working in the industry for the young people is not trendy, and that has to be changed. So in my opinion, strategically, the industrial policy has to be focused on the level of modernization to go up, the level of training to be adequate, and industry to become fashionable, not only efficiency, not only salary, but also working conditions, career growth, contemporary technologies, and possibility to work in different sectors, etc. So there are no simple answers here, but we have to understand that human capital has been lost already because of this gap. And if we want to build that, we need to do more than just simply giving money there or giving benefits. There has to be a brand name of industry that would be attractive for the young people, because otherwise we will be building new plants and there will be no one to work there. So let's invest more in a comprehensive manner in the development of the industry. Thank you very much. Thank you, Timothy. I would like to say that I remember when you were the Minister of Economy, you were saying that Ukraine needs to attract, if I'm not mistaken, about $50 billion from 50 to $100 billion of investments to compete, simply to come to a level of modernization of the upgrading of the equipment that our neighbors enjoy, including Belarus or Russia or Poland. So we're talking about upgrading the resource base. Yes, as for equipment, yes, and that's something the economy and the industry needs, are not simply to survive, but to be on par in terms of competition on the external markets. What kind of competition? Well, now we're talking about the Green Deal as well, and CBAM and CBAT, the emission tax, which can hit Ukrainian producers very much, and €6 billion per year for additional expenditures for the industry. We just clarified that the government's role is the key in terms of restoring the industrial policy, re-industrialization, and Timothy shared very deep thoughts about creating the brand and making the industrial production trendy, attracting young experts who can work there. So I have a question to Mr. Vlasyuk. Could you please tell me, after these statements, as a person who is working rather with business, what would you want to hear? What kind of actions is the business expecting from the state to invest more in the upgrading and bring people back to Ukraine and nourish new labor, qualified labor force? Because industry, of course, is one of the drivers of our economy, but there are things that need to be replaced. Some of the spare parts in this mechanism need to be replaced. I have a short presentation, if you could upload it. Thanks. So let's talk about industry. What I suggest is this view. So why do we have manufacturing and production? The economy exists to make the life of people more comfortable, better, allow them to implement their wishes. And what we see here is in this hall is the results of the processing industry. The plant is manufacturing. Because of the processing industry, we see things that are around us. This is processing industry. That's why it is attractive. Based on the products of the processing industry, services are being created. There are no goods, there are no services. For example, the good video cameras that are here in this room. So if there were no proper camera, there would be no operator who can shoot the camera. So things that we consume, cars that we drive, laptops, furniture, this is all processing industry. And the community who can produce this and manufacture this becomes very close to the consumer because they produce things that are in demand on the external markets. The communities who cannot produce such things economically are worse off. And that's how we have to look at the processing industry. In our situation, in our country, where there are lots of things that have not been addressed in the economy, it's important to find the way out, the shortest way out, to rebuild the economy of Ukraine and find where to focus the resources of the government, of the country, of the citizens, financial resources. And in my point of view, and the point of view of many of the fellow colleagues, this focus should be made by establishing the processing industry, which will allow us to produce more goods for the internal and the external markets. If you look at the economy of Ukraine at this slide, you can see that the economy of Ukraine is always in the situation that after the crisis and downfalls, they cannot go back to the peak. This is the GDP for the last 30 years, and we can see that we have not even come back to the point of independence. Why? Because GDP is just the top of the iceberg. The tip of the iceberg that we can see. The biggest important things are internal structural processes that Metro and Timothy referred to. The structure of the economy are invisible. The structural changes are the manufacturing, establishment of manufacturing that make the economy more competitive. And the industry here plays the key role, special role. If we look at the GDP structure and other countries, just a bit of economic turmoil because that's important. The industrial part is processing industry is very small, the red one. It's only more than 10%. In other countries who are economically successful, Poland, Turkey, Slovak Republic, it's 17, 18, 19%. So, in this huge bulk of problems that we have to act on this manufacturing industry, processing industry part, and that's the key structural issue. And spin-offs are economic slowdowns, low income of people, etc. So out of this spectrum, things that we need to focus on is processing industry. The absence of sufficient processing industry goods doesn't allow the agriculture to tap on their potential. For example, if you're producing grain, you need machinery, you need fuel, you need seeds. If you're not producing this, you import these things. So the import is more than 75%. Means that the money that we will earn from exports of grain, we will spend for importing these goods. So no matter how much grain we produce, still we are going to be on the level of low income. We will not have that growth that we need. For example, I showed you the previous graph. From the 2010 to 2011, we produced 70% more of grain. At the same time, our GDP went down. Why? Again, because we don't have the spectrum of products which are produced here to do the same technologically by these domestic elements. And just the example of what processing industry is doing to the economy. It turns the royalty into the added value. For example, 1 ton of grain, we have 50 added value, $50 added value by processing this. If we do something, if we process it, we make $300. So $50 of added value is the earnings of the government and the citizens, and 300. So 50 or 300. That's the difference, and that's the essence of the economy. This is why the government is focusing on making sure that this added value rollout is inside the country, and that's the secret of the economy. And so how would our processing industry should look like? We visualized it. We think that processing industry of Ukraine should be technological, should be diversified. We can produce lots of goods, and it has to be potential capable from the export point of view. So Mr. Gusev reformed to the processing industry and the fourth industry. First, in 2 segments are important: processing of the local raw materials. We have lots of raw materials: agricultural, wood, mineral deposits. We are selling this raw. It has to be processed inside of Ukraine. That would allow Ukraine to earn lots of money, create jobs in the regions, because scaling up opportunity is big. Then smart import replacement. So we have a small market. We have to be have capacity from the export point of view. But there are things that, for example, we import glass. So for 5 million, there should be 1 glass factory. We have none. We used to have one, but it's not. So refinery products, we're importing this. Cars, we're importing this. In the developed economies, there's a gentleman's set, as they call it. Refineries, cars, different building materials, electronics, household supplies. So this has to be manufactured locally, and it's important to open this up. Open up added value inside of Ukraine. Of course, new goods based on the digital technology, small companies that were referred to like Unit City, where this is done. Ukraine has huge engineering capacity and creativity capacity. That's the sector which is invisible, but it has to be developed as well. And that is also the possibility for processing goods. More than 75% of raw grain is exported. There's no country anywhere else who's doing this. So Cargill buys our grain, they take it to Canada, and they transform $50 to $300. This has to be changed. It has to be processed inside the Ukraine. Now, in terms of policy, the policy of industrial development is very important. It has to be focused on stimulating and supporting entrepreneurship in the manufacturing sector. There are different types of entrepreneurship, but to build a plant, it's a risky activity, and it takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. He's risking, he takes the risk, so he needs to be supported. So the support in the market economy here is an entrepreneur who invests to expansion of manufacturing, creating new plants. It's a big risk, but he's creating benefit for the society, creating new jobs. He's structurally changing the economy, so the government has to support him or her, and that's the answer on the policy. So look what other countries are doing in this regard. This is the set of instruments of industrial policy which is applied by neighboring successful countries and you versus Ukraine. You can't compare these checklists. It's much weaker in Ukraine. So when we're asking the question, why they invest into plants in Poland, in Turkey or Slovak, from investors who can choose where to invest, you have to remember this slide. Protection of property rights, basic economic freedoms, they do mean a lot, but this policy also has to be used in parallel, applied in parallel to achieving economic freedoms. So we're losing against this checklist. And what the policy should be, it has to be a comprehensive policy. Fiscal and credit policies, so they should have a long-term financing and cheap financing, because if we have a monetary hunger and expensive money, it will be difficult to invest. In fiscal policy, amongst others as well, we should also, there has to be an infrastructure around state-owned companies, and in investments into education and healthcare, because human capital and people who are working in these enterprises, they play a huge role, and that should be invested by the government, by the country, and then the entrepreneur will find enough labor force, qualified labor force, and this will motivate him to create companies. And technical policy. Technical policy is about not allowing to exploit old goods. So the car should not be used for the train car by 100 years. It has to be replaced. So it has to be a barrier to the low-quality imports. I won't name the country which is cheap, and so combining these three policy is the example of the industrial development. And things that need to be established. Well, in our point of view, it's enough to have 5 institutions. Ukraine needs mandatorily the institution that stimulates structural changes. The National Fund for Structural Change of the Economy, or you can call the Development Bank. So the money, cheap financing for the entrepreneurs who are building new facilities, maybe grants for each new job, or industrial parks. They have to be equipped with tax benefits, tax exemptions. Now, the Export Credit Agency, the development of the innovations, more investments for the R&D, and farmer, industrial and farming fund. So the agriculture is earning a lot. It's important for this money to go to purchase the produce that could be used in the agriculture by the national producers. So not much. These 5 institutions would be enough, and the draft laws that are in the parliament to be passed, and then this policy will move on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Volodymyr. It's a very in-depth and insightful presentation. I'm very happy to have seen many of the things that the Parliament already started implementing: industrial parks, export credit agency, and localization. I've seen in your presentation as well. And of course, we're talking about here how pragmatic an economic policy become if the government really decides to take that course, and that probably would be a reasonable thing to do. So in the question of this balance between raw material base and manufacturing, I would like to give the floor to our last speaker, last but not least, Mauro. Those of you who don't know, until 2013, in principle, the money that was paid by ArcelorMittal was 50% out of all income from privatization. So there was the biggest, or one of the biggest privatizations. So the fact that very few knew, and we are at the threshold of the launch of the big privatization and small privatization, and we're doing our best for this big income from the Arcelor sales to be less and less. We want more privatization. I would like to congratulate you with the steel being at peak. So the weapons, drugs, and steel become the most traded goods now. So in the long-term perspective, the investments in the final product production is more reliable because of the smaller volatility of the external markets. And as a country, we can't keep selling steel and buying cars instead and then scold ourselves for low salaries. This is what Volodymyr was alluding to. So this first question, what kind of signals are foreign investors looking for, like Arcelor, and to start investing into Ukraine? And how do we do that the processing industry would finally begin to dominate over the raw material? Maybe big privatization can contribute, or do you see some other instruments, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Dimitro, for the introduction of our company and the history of this privatization. Of course, the problem for us is not at all what was the past. No, the problem is how to mold what will be the future of this business in Ukraine. You know, this facility that we have there, once we bought it in 2005, still almost all the equipment and the inside machines were dated in the 70s. Actually, we still have one of the biggest blast furnaces in Europe. At that time, it was the biggest blast furnace in Europe. Blast furnace number 9. It's been built in 1974. And it's still in use. And actually, linking my speech to what Timothy said before, in order now to prolong the life of this facility and to modernize it to the level of environmental friendly that is necessary according to the new emission, we are talking about investment of $300 million only for that object. So the company during the year has been making several investments. Actually, after the privatization, we had to invest around $5 billion. And I think that more has to come, because still we have some old and out-of-date installation and facility inside. Now, what is the problem? No, because I try to focus on what is the problem, what we see as a challenge for the next year. Now, first of all, when we see the results of the different surveys, we see that actually the heavy industry is not sexy at all for anybody. No? It's not only by the media, but by the young people especially, as it was mentioned before. So, but why is not sexy? No, if you look, for example, to some construction, some famous construction of today, you watch in Dubai and you see the Burj Khalifa. You know, maybe some of you know, some of you doesn't know, but the Burj Khalifa is built with steel rebars produced in ArcelorMittal Kryvyi Rih. So all of it. So everybody, when looks at that, looks at the future, looks at the design, looks at the architecture, something very sexy, but they're not looking at the foundation of it. No, the foundation of it and how it's built is actually coming from the heavy industry. Something that everybody considers that is not anymore necessary, this out-of-date industry, and so on and so on and so forth. So our challenge is to change this paradigm. How we show that this industry is still the foundation of everything. No? If we talk about construction, today ArcelorMittal in Ukraine is exporting 85% of the production. No, just because in Ukraine there is still enough construction and activity, because of course we privilege the local market, but then we have bigger capacity, so at the end of the day we export everywhere in the world our production. And how we make this efficient. So we talk about modernization, we talk about new investment, so which is the elixir for us to go through the next 20 to 40 years. So first of all, we have a problem. All the investment that we do, they don't have a very good payback. So everybody today looks at good investment, no? Good services, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. When we think to put new plants in our facility and we have to spend $3-4 billion, we don't have these numbers in mind. No, we are just looking at the future of the 20 years, and there is no payback at all for that. So how we want to go ahead in that? Of course, we're going to go ahead because we see in Ukraine there is a huge potential. There is not only a huge potential in terms of resources, so I'm talking about mineral resources, but also a very huge potential in terms of people. Now, we consider that in this country we have very skilled technical people, but talking about our industry, of course, we focus more on this type of disciplines that could really make a difference. And when we look at the future of this country towards Europe, we can really see that our company here in Ukraine must be a pillar of the industry in Europe. Now we look at Europe, we see what they do, and we don't see a big development of the heavy industry over there. No, on the contrary, we see the industry in Europe somehow stable, in some places a little bit declining. So the tenure of investments that are done in Europe has the same payback that we have here, but they don't have the resources. So there is actually a big advantage to be here in Ukraine, looking at the future. So we need to make sure that the investors, us and other investors that will come, will find a proper investment climate in the country in order to proceed with these big investments. Because still what we see from our side, we are still in the center of the political agenda. No, and we are simply a business. No, you know the history, everybody of you probably knows the history of this company from the beginning, from the privatization, and it was always in the center of the political agenda. But actually, this should not be like that. No, should be like a business, and should be run like a business. And because of that, you know, as an international company, we actually are somehow the biggest investor in this country, and we compete with other companies that are owned locally. In our case, we are a little bit suffering this pressure, that is coming out from the political arena. Because at the end of the day, we are not involved in this discussion. We don't have, media. We pass most of our time trying to defend ourselves, trying to stop, some harassment that are happening during the last year. So I think this is a very important point that we need to put on the table. So when a company like us decide to develop the future and decide to invest further $5 billion or $10 billion for the next 30 years, must be sure that these situations are actually avoided. So there will not be any pressure, there will not be any issues that will jeopardize this type of decisions. Because as you know, we are part of a multinational company, and when we decide about investment, Ukraine is just one cell of the big part of the group. So at the end of the day, the decision to come to Ukraine instead of going to another country that is also in developing around the world is pretty linked to this stability, no? To the investment climate that we will be able together to create in the country. Of course, since I came 1.5 years ago, I saw many improvements. No, but still, we are working to execute such improvement, to put that in place. And this will be a very good example, not only for us, but we will be the example for the other investors that would decide to come in Ukraine. Because everybody will see that at the end, the business is treated simple like a business. And of course, the business has to respect all the rules and the regulations that are put in place. But there is not a second agenda. There is not a political agenda. There is not a pressure just to try to squeeze the investor coming to Ukraine and to see in the short term what we can do with these guys. This is not for the short term. As I mentioned, our investment, we are thinking 20 years. 20 years is a minimum horizon of our investment. So we cannot have from one side a company thinking about 20 years and from the other side, the other thinking that in 2-3 years we need to change everything and we need to execute everything. Because this is not fitting, the expectation of an investor coming to Ukraine, especially from Europe. If you look at Europe, at the end of the day, investors coming from Europe, they are looking to the 20-year stability because they have the stability there. They maybe see, as I mentioned before, some declining situation. They want to explore new horizons, new countries, new opportunities, but they want to see that this opportunity will last in the long term. And they will not have any issues to solve in the next 10 years, because if not, the decision will not make sense. No? So we consider that we will be a good example for everybody. We still are very committed to this country. We recently announced an additional $1 billion of investment, also to take the opportunity of the new investment nannies law that has been put in place. We are ready to start with our projects. Of course, the majority of the projects today are linked to modernization and to environmental friendly, to change the footprint of the steel business. This is not the news. Everybody is moving in that direction now. Our company declared by 2050 will be carbon neutral. So at the end, we are still on time to comply with these results. So I hope we can continue on that. And so thank you very much for inviting me to this speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mauro.
Thank you very much, Mauro. I would like to say that today, Ukraine 2030 Forum, so for sure we're going to forecast for the next 10 years. If we manage to do that, then we can talk about the next 20 years. I do appreciate the efforts of each panelist. I would like to say that in economic science there is a rule. Under circumstances of the crisis of industrial production, this is followed by the crisis of all other sectors of the economy. Mr. Vlasyuk mentioned that suffering the agriculture and many other sectors because they are kind of derivatives from the point of view of the multiplication effect, etc. So we shouldn't be satisfied with the illusions that without regulating the issue of development of industrial sector, we will be able to, let's say, overcome the economic crisis and make our citizens happier and richer. I would like to have the Ukrainian commodities made and goods made of Ukrainian resources by the Ukrainian, let's say, producers and manufacturers. Not because I believe that Ukrainians are the best, but we have the best opportunities. In each country there is such a policy, and each developed country is oriented towards the closed loop cycle, and this must be based on, created within this or another country. We can take, as an example, the economic policy in France, Germany, or Italy. We were debating the problems of the industry, and I'm happy to realize that the situation changes for the better. We were discussing the state aid be given to this or another sector in our history, but it doesn't mean that those failed precedents or the happenings should eliminate, or let's say should cancel the whole sector or branch without the support on the part of the state, and we heard that from Mr. Gusev and Zavitnevich and Volsyuk. The Ukrainian industry will be doomed to the eternal, let's say, decline and the people to poverty. For different reasons, our industry finds itself in rather, let's say, a bad situation. One of the reasons is the war. When back in 2014, the Russian Federation started military aggression in Ukraine, it was aimed, among other things, at industrial projects. They actually limited or restricted the transit, and several figures as a result of this aggression as follows: the development of motor vehicles minus 10%, railroad cars minus 17%, metallurgy are still making minus 29%, etc. That's why the industry is also associated with our security. And it's understandable that the aggression aimed at the industrial projects, they tried to weaken the economic capability of our country, because indeed we must be competitive at the expense of the real sector. It's high time for us to understand that the countries compete in the world, like the fuel stations or supermarkets compete, or just private companies do. There are no good friends who just will for nothing give you some privileges or loans. You know, and this logic underlies the creation of industrial parks. We would like to compete with other countries for Ukraine to become the full-fledged partner and competitor. And we are talking that despite the fact that the draft law hasn't been approved or adopted in secondary reading, we received the support from foreign companies. We know that the foreign and domestic investors, they are forming the portfolio fixed 500, 600 million euros in order to invest money into the industrial parks. We have to take care about the internal competition or domestic competition. The law submitted by President Zelensky about industrialization economy deals with this, let's say, division of the authority and business to ensure the necessary competition. We also have the draft laws about anti-dumping and subsidiary protection, which will make it possible for the Ukrainian manufacturers to be competitive at the external markets. We also have to fight for our manufacturers using different stimuli. We want our manufacturer inside Ukraine to feel as comfortable as European producer manufacturer feels themselves on the territory of EU countries. We want the Ukrainian manufacturers to know that here in this country they can rely on the same stimuli as the European countries' producers rely upon. Each time when we are talking against such draft laws localization, we have to understand that we are against the logic behind which we have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian employees who either will lose their job or won't find a job. I would like to thank all the panels, all the speakers, and wish you, when you come back to your respective offices, you, esteemed colleagues, really start to take care more seriously about what we call the Ukrainian interests and stick to the logic further on about the simulation of Ukrainian interests and take them as a core ideas in your work and your efforts, so that we could bring Ukraine to the flourishing situation. I would like to thank you and thank our audience. Maybe we have some questions from the audience, if we still have time for that. No. Okay, in this case, I give the floor back to my esteemed colleague. Thank you very much indeed. I would like to thank our participants in our discussion. The Ukraine 30 Forum continues. Already tomorrow, we are going to talk a rather important topic, combating or fighting against oligarchs. So we are going to have a very interesting topic tomorrow. The third day of this week, we are going to talk about big-time, big-scale privatization. You can read more at our website, Ukraine30.com. Thank you very much indeed. Good luck.